All right. Okay, folks. So I really want to spend a small amount of time on the Kuzari today, simply because there's a lot for us to discuss in what I wanted to present for Parshat Ki Tetzei. So let's just pick up where we left off. We'll go back a little bit and talk about. We'll go back to page 504 in the Kuzari. So we're well into the fifth ma'amar, into the fifth essay. And our topic of discussion is creation, and could creation have happened on its own, as some ancient philosophers suggest, just like many modern 21st century scientists suggest as well. Could creation have happened on its own? And after Rebbe Yehuda Halevi has presented some of the conventional ideas of some of the philosophers of his time, he tells us that this is the reason why God started the Torah with the story of creation, to emphatically state that the world was created at one moment in time by a creator with intent, with sentience, and with direction. And to those who suggest that the world was created by chance just because of the motions of the celestial spheres, this was the belief that the celestial spheres have eternally existed, and it is through their motions that all of the different things that we find in our terrestrial existence have come into existence. The idea being that motion is the cause of coming into being of physical entities, that through the motion of these celestial bodies, physical things come into existence. It's a very foreign idea for all of us, I know, but that's what the idea was back then. So the Kuzari, the Khazar king now, who's long ago converted to Judaism and is a believer in the Torah, he says, I would challenge such a person, anyone who suggests that the world was created by the motions of the spheres, by asking about the outermost celestial sphere. What causes it to move? Meaning, there's got to be a prime mover. You've heard that term before, the prime mover. It means that was Aristotle's conception of God as the deity. There's got to be some kind of ultimate being that is in control of the movement of all that exists. Is this also an incidental phenomenon or not? I would then challenge him by observing that there are an infinite number of stellar configurations, yet we see only a finite number of species within the plant and animal kingdoms, and this number is static, never increasing or decreasing. Here's my second challenge. My first challenge is, what causes the outermost motion to move? There's got to be some kind of prime mover or some kind of deity that is in charge of everything. And that's something that philosophers cannot account for. And as we explained before we took a break for the summer, that's also something that modern science is still left sort of struggling with. Even though modern science believes in the concept of a Big Bang, as it were, even though that science is constantly changing, and there is this idea of an origin of existence, nonetheless, what is the cause of that origin? There doesn't seem to be a very cogent way of explaining it. I mean, the way that some people explain it is that we cannot speak of time and space before the coming into being of time and space. So can we talk about causality in the absence of time and space? So that's one way of just sort of saying we just can't understand. But ultimately, if the human being is going to try to make sense of anything that exists, we have to try and put it into terms that we can at least comprehend, which is there's a prime cause. There's a prime mover and a prime cause to everything that exists, and we call that God. And then the second challenge that he has is that if the coming into being of all that exists in our terrestrial realm is a result of the motions of the spheres, Well, there is an infinite amount of motion that is taking place in the heavens. All different kinds of configurations of the thousands upon millions of celestial bodies that exist out there. And yet we never see any changes or any new species being added to the current ones. Now, that's not entirely true. I mean, because after all, there have been the proliferation of new species over the course of millennia, but we don't see any dramatic changes. It's not like every week we see a new species emerging, which we would expect to see if, as a result of an infinite amount of motions in the celestial bodies, there should be an infinite number of species corresponding to the motions of those celestial bodies. And we don't see that. So we would expect that as a result of the constantly changing stellar configurations, new forms would arise while others would be destroyed. Whether or not you buy that argument or not is not really so important right now, but at least it's the Khazar king going along with this argument, with this line of argumentation, that it's not feasible to suggest that the sole source of existence is through just a inanimate kind of non-sentient and non-intentional motion of the celestial bodies that is the cause of everything that comes into existence. And then the rabbi responds as follows: your argument is sound. It is further strengthened by the fact that we perceive divine wisdom in many creations. So to bolster what you've just said, if things were just going to come into existence by chance, we would have expected to see things running in a haphazard way. And yet, when we look out at creation and we see the world in all of its majesty, and the hills, and the plants, and the birds, and the bees, and everything that is out there, we do seem to see some kind of order that seems to trace us back to a creator, and the necessary purposes they serve. This has already been expounded in Aristotle's Benefits of the Animal Species, which is probably referring to Historia Animalium, one of Aristotle's works. In Galen's Benefits of the Organs, Galen was a medieval physician that is quoted by so many of our medievalists, and in other books of remarkable wisdom. And then he writes, notice, if we wanted to take a look at the wisdom that is innate within creation, we could take a look both in the Talmud and also in the secular writings to see how miraculous it is that when we look out at the world and we see just the pollination of plants that happens through the bees is a miraculous thing, that somehow these little insects have an instinct to pollinate flowers and trees. And if it were not for these little bugs that do cross-pollination, nothing would grow. The male tree could not reproduce with the female tree. The pistil and the stamen would not be able to reproduce on their own. So how does this happen? How does it all come together? There's a remarkable wisdom behind it, and that's what we call God. Now, this wisdom is also evidenced in domestic animals, such as sheep, cattle, horses, and donkeys. They exist for the sake of man. Indeed, there would be no way for them to survive in the wild. They thus exist in inhabited areas to serve man. And another proof that he brings of the wisdom in creation is that we find two different kinds of animals. If we wanted to divide the world in that way, we find animals of the wild, like the squirrels and the rodents and the coyotes, who are supposed to be in the wild, we would think, right? That's a big issue today in our neighborhood. The lions, the tigers, and the bears, that's one classification. And the other classification are the domesticated animals, the farm animals, which refers to donkeys, horses, camels, sheep, cows, goats, and the like. These kinds of animals were clearly created for the benefit of man and were not created for their own benefit, because they could not exist on their own, subsist on their own in the wild. Now, what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is saying now is that you see some kind of divine wisdom in the fact that God created both animals of the wild and animals that can only survive under the domination of humankind. I'm not so convinced about that. I think that if you trace the history of, let's say, animals like dogs, you'll discover that dogs were domesticated over the course of centuries, and that originally dogs were considered to be wild creatures until human beings learned how to domesticate them. And yeah, yeah. But there seems to have been some kind of domestication process. And I'm wondering whether, like you look at horses also, some horses live in the wild and some horses are domesticated. So I'm not really convinced by this argument. But in general, and I'm going to leave us on a hanging cliff at this moment, what I want us to explore next week is the question that the Rambam undertakes in the Guide for the Perplexed. And that is it possible, do we believe in Judaism that every organism of our world exists for the sake of man? Or is it possible that different other organisms that are non-human exist for their own sake? So I want you to just think about that question for a little while, because I'd like to revisit that when we resume next week in the Kuzari. Once again, do other organisms exist exclusively for man? Is it to serve man? Do the lions and tigers and bears in places like Africa and the North Pole, do they exist for the sake of man also? Or do they have some kind of independent purpose which has nothing to do with human beings? There are two schools of thought on this within Jewish thinkers, and so it's not an easy answer, just a yes or no. Okay, so let's put that aside for now, and we're going to continue to discuss a topic of animals today, because I want to do a deep dive into the mitzvah that appears in this parsha, the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein, the sending away the mother bird. And we're going to discuss one aspect of this mitzvah that I think you'll find very interesting. Okay, so let's put aside our kuzaris and open up and just take a look at the handout that you see on the screen.
Remember, we wanted to put Shiluach HaKein together.
Yes, I do. I have a vague memory of that. So the mitzvah is in our parsha. Ki yikarei kan sipor lefanecha baderech. When you encounter a bird's nest in front of you on the road, b'chol eitz o al haaretz, it could be in a tree or it could be on the earth. Efrochim o veitzim. They could be chicks, they could be eggs. And so the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein both applies to when you encounter a nest with eggs or when you encounter a nest with newly hatched chicks. The mitzvah applies in both cases.
I just like one thing.
Yeah.
Is he correct? You said encounter, but that's if it was you proof resh hay, but it's with an olive.
Right, but the Gemara explains that it does. That's a very good point from a Hebraic standpoint. But here the Gemara understands yikarei with a hay. That's really what the Torah means over here.
Then why didn't
Because it's a good question. I don't know. The ha'im rovetzet al ha'efrochim, if the mother is crouching upon the chicks or o al habitzim or on the eggs, lo tikach ha'im al habanim, do not take the mother and the children together. Shaleach tishalach et ha'im ve'et habanim tikach lach. You shall surely send away the mother, and then the children you can take for yourself. Laman yitav lach v'harachta yamim, in order that it be good for you and you have length of days. Okay? That's the mitzvah. So much has been said about this mitzvah, but there's a very simple question that needs to be asked, and that is, do I have a mitzvah to send away the mother bird if I really don't want the eggs?
It doesn't say anything about whether you need the eggs. It says so that you should have long life. And
Yeah, so you would think, based on that reading, Toby, you would conclude that if you want the eggs or you don't want the eggs, it shouldn't make a difference. By doing this mitzvah, you get long life. So how would you view this mitzvah then? As a chok? Something that has no rhyme or reason to it?
to me, it's a book.
Okay.
For many years, I have had birds come and build nests on my patio, over my patio light. And within a few weeks, there are eggs, and then there are chicks, and then I watch as they teach the chicks how to fly. I won't touch those nests. Personally, I won't let anyone else go near them. I don't eat the eggs. It may be, a reason for long life, but there are other mitzvahs for Arichas Yamim as well.
Okay, that's a very sensible approach, and I'm going to assuage your uncertainty about that by showing you a tshuva from the Chatam Sofer of the 19th century. That's what we're going to look at as our origin point, and I want to expand from there.
Also, the question is it a mitzvah that you have to go after, or if you happen to encounter, like you said?
It's only,
That's
yes,
also-
the Gemara says it's not a mitzvah that you run after. It's only a mitzvah that when you encounter it, but you're not supposed to drive around
Right.
the city of Toronto going under underpasses in the hopes that you'll find a nest, right? There's no mitzvah to do that, okay? It's when it occurs, when the mitzvah happens to occur to you. That's the question. Is it wrong to ignore the opportunity? And that's what we have to discover. I venture to say that none of us would want to eat those pigeons or robins' eggs. Number one, because we may, if assuming that they're fertilized eggs, which they probably are, none of us eat fertilized eggs today. We only eat what are they called? The unfertilized eggs, because we don't want to encounter a blood spot or a partially formed embryo and stuff like that. It's something that we probably wouldn't do. And the eggs are tiny and they're not going to provide much yield anyway. So should we ignore the nest? What should we do? What should our attitude be? So here's, I'm just giving you a very, very abridged version of a responsum from Rabbi Moshe Sofer of the 19th century. Al da'at mi shepaga bekan ve'em yoshevet al habanim biyom Shabbos kodesh. His question was presented as follows. A person presented him a question. A person encounters a nest on Shabbos, and he has the opportunity to do the mitzvah. Can the mitzvah be done on Shabbat? Okay. On the one hand, you have a biblical commandment. On the other hand, you by touching the bird's tail, which is the way you're supposed to send away the mother bird, you're handling muktzah. And by picking up the nest or the eggs, you're handling muktzah. So can we justify violating a rabbinic law for the sake of performing the biblical commandment? That's the question. Okay. Techila, so he says, before we can even look at that question, we have to ask a more basic question. Nachkor b'masha katav hachavot yair b'tshuva. Let's look at what Rabbi Yehuda Bachrach writes in a responsum from 2 centuries ago. I mechuyav l'shaleach afilu eino rotze lo ba'em v'lo babanim. Is there an obligation to send away the mother bird when you don't want the mother and you don't want the birds? O Dilma, or perhaps, im yirtzeh likach habanim, his hira Torah lo tikach emal habanim, aval lo yirtzeh lo zeh v'lo zeh, yanichem b'mekomam. Or perhaps, the Torah is only giving you a solution when you want the eggs. But if you don't want the eggs, leave it alone. That's the question that the Chavot Yair engages in. Linda, go ahead, please.
So my question is really, why take it at all? Like, I would think if the goal is kindness, to take a mother away from its babies or the potential babies just seems wrong in itself. Like, it's different with chickens who lay eggs, that's different. But this is like separating the mother from its eggs. I mean, I would say don't do it at all.
You would say don't do it at all, like Toby was arguing before.
But that's
She's seen it. So, but that's the question. The Torah says you get long life for doing this mitzvah. Is it like a chok that has no rhyme or reason? And the Torah says just do it. Or is there something that is the underlying cause of this mitzvah, such that once we are able to discern what that is, we haven't seen yet whether it's compassion or not. If we don't want the eggs, then there's no mitzvah.
Isn't there a saying about that? If you're doing it for the compassion reason, like you think, sorry, but
Okay.
it's the wrong way of thinking. right?
Okay, so first of all, he says, I'm going to direct you to a commentary of the Ramban on the Chumash. B'ni Mukei Chumash Shalom, Katav al pi Rambam b'moire nevuchim. So the Ramban, first of all, cites the Rambam in the Guide for the Perplexed. And he says that this is also something that is stated by the Sefer HaChinuch. B'tam ha-mitzvah hahi. Why did God give us this mitzvah in the first place? So like Linda and Toby surmised, Shelo nit achzer la'akor em albanim. Because it is absolute cruelty to take a mother and a bird at the same time to eat for food. As such, and the Ramban says that it's very much akin, I think the Rambam says it's very much akin to the prohibition of a mother and her offspring shall not be slaughtered. If it's, let's say, a mother cow and a baby calf cannot be slaughtered on the same day. It's considered to be overly cruel. Now, is shechita permitted? Of course, we eat animals all the time. Most of us eat animals on a regular basis. Is that considered to be cruelty to animals?
No.
Why is that not cruelty to animals?
A lot of people, the pizza people you never
We do
encounter.
it in a way, follow.
Okay, so we choose the least cruel way, but okay, so they were put on, again, do animals exist to serve man, or do they have independent purpose or not? What about the polar bears? If I encounter a polar bear, can I go, I mean, they're not kosher, but let's say I encounter a giraffe or some other animal of the wild. Can I say, you were put on this earth to serve me, and therefore I will shecht you? So that's really the question. But, and it certainly doesn't seem to, you have to sort of do some kind of mental acrobatic to say, it's not cruel, but at the same time, I'm killing an animal for my own benefit. But there are limits to how cruel I'm allowed to be. I guess what you would say is that the prohibition of tsar balei chayim, of causing pain to an animal, is a prohibition on gratuitously causing pain to an animal, which means that if there is human utility, if there's human benefit, then we can justify causing pain to an animal or even taking its life, but only up to a limit. It can't be gratuitous pain, and I have to minimize the pain as much as possible. And the Torah wishes to train me and refine my character by teaching me mitzvot that will help me not to be overly cruel. Da'afal gav, da'asur lomar al kan sipor yagiu rachamecha. He says, and this is what Alan was quoting from a moment ago, the Mishnah says that if a person would come forward and try to lead the congregation in prayer, and he says, repeat after me, God, may you be merciful upon us like you are merciful to the mother bird, mishatkinoto. We silence such a person. Now, v'hatam shelo higiu rachamav al ba'alei chayim kolshu l'tzarech adam. Dimkein haya asur lishchot ba'alei chayim. And the reason why, and this is the way that the Chatam Sofer is reading the commentary, although it's understood in different ways. Why is it that the Mishnah says that you silence such a person? Because the fact of the matter is that God is discompassionate to animals to the point that he allows human beings to kill animals for food. So we wouldn't want to tell God, be compassionate upon us like you're compassionate upon the mother bird, because God is not so compassionate to birds or to other animals that are used for human consumption. You allow us to kill animals for food, so you wouldn't want to ask God to have the same compassion upon us. Okay?
Well, people say
So-
that's a concession and the
Okay,
ideally.
all right, so 1 second. Ach gezerotein aleinu, shelo nilmod lehit achzer unitakein midotenu ayin sham. And therefore, the way that the Ramban understands the Mishnah and the Rambam is that he says there is a commandment to help refine human character. Even though Hashem gives us permission to shecht and to kill animals for food, but he wants us to learn refinement even within that permissible act. So don't be gratuitously cruel and minimize the amount of cruelty as much as possible upon the animals. And that's the purpose of this mitzvah, is not for the sake of mercy on the bird itself, because really birds are not the subject of so much of God's mercy, but rather to teach human beings refined behavior. It turns out that when we look at the way the Ramban and the Rambam approach this mitzvah, if a person doesn't need the chicks or the eggs, not only is he not obligated to send away the mother bird, but he's acting cruelly, gratuitously. Why do I have to go through this process of sending away a mother bird when I don't want the eggs? It's one thing, should I gratuitously shecht animals just because I can?
That's where it gets.
If I don't need them for food, then of course I shouldn't shecht animals. Let them live. Let them be happy in their life, to whatever extent they can be.
We have fruits and vegetables.
Well, that's arguable. It's arguable whether a person can get his full nutritional needs through veganism or through vegetarianism. Yes, there is an argument to be made, and I believe that one day we will figure out how to get sufficient protein without having to kill animals. But this is a debate among the modern medical community, whether you can gain sufficient protein from
It's just an argument.
from organisms that are not animal. Okay. V'hinei lefi tam zeh. Okay. So fine. Uvemakom shenilmod shelo nitachzer, adarabba nargil atzmenu ba'achzariyut uletzaer balei chayim al magan. He says, legaresh ha'eme al baneh v'tzar bal chaim deoraisa. He says that is the epitome of gratuitous cruelty. To send away a mother bird when you don't need the eggs, there's no utility for you. That is the ultimate cruelty, and that's tsar ba'alei chayim. If anything, argues the Chatam Sofer, by sending away the mother bird, you're in violation of tsar ba'alei chayim, which is a biblical prohibition. You're not allowed to gratuitously inflict cruelty or pain upon an animal. Elish katav Ramban shel hugia racham aval ba'alei chayim im hu letzarech ha'adam. A bit of a repetition. I'm quoting the bulk of the tshuva. There's a lot of what we call lumdus. There's a lot of dialectical conversation that I'm leaving out in this snippet that I'm providing. I just want to give you the relevant sources. So he says, "V'hinei b'tshuvat Chacham Tzvi." Another great responder is the Chacham Tzvi. He argues that there is no mitzvah to take the children, to take the eggs when you don't want them. You can send away both the mother and the chicks. Etc., etc. And therefore, when the Torah says, send away the mother bird, it's really speaking only in the vernacular. Typically, a person, when he sends away, when he encounters a nest, is going to want the eggs. And therefore, the Torah is limiting him and says, don't take the eggs and the mother, just take the eggs. And it's almost like when the Torah says, for example, when the Torah says, Sheshet yamim ta'avod uvayom hashevi'i tishbot, work 6 days and rest on the seventh. Is there an obligation to work for 6 days? What if I am independently wealthy and I can sit and eat bonbons all day without having to go to work? Is there an obligation for me to work for 6 days? No. The Torah, when it says Sheishat Yamim Ta'avod, work for 6 days, it's speaking in the vernacular. Typically, a person would want to work for 7 days, and the Torah is limiting that opportunity and saying work for 6 days. Similarly, when the Torah says take the offspring, it's not an obligation. You don't have to take them. Next. However, up until now, we've been discussing the Talmudic approach to the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird, which is that it's to refine human beings and to teach us not to be gratuitously cruel. There is, however, a source in the Zohar. What does the Zohar say? The Zohar says, La'orer yeyalet ima ila'a al baneha, or yelalat. I'm not sure how to pronounce that Aramaic word. It is the purpose of sending away the mother bird is to arouse the ima ila'a, the feminine aspect of God, over God's children. So when the Torah says, send away the mother bird, it is a metaphor for what has happened since the destruction of the temple. When God departed from the Jewish people upon the destruction of the temple, it left the children all alone. And so what we do is we replicate the act of God departing from his children in order that this will arouse divine mercy. That's what is being paraphrased from the Zohar. In which case, every time I perform the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein, regardless of the human compassion that is either engendered or not engendered thereby, there is a spiritual or metaphysical benefit that it reminds God and arouses his mercy to have compassion upon the Jewish people. Because we are like those motherless little chicks, little bird egglets, or whatever you want to call them. We are the desolate children of the mother who has left us, the feminine aspect of Hashem. Im kain, if so, mitzvah lahader achar kain kedei la'orer rachamei ima ila al baneha. According to the Zohar, it would be a virtue to seek out a nest and to send away the mother bird to arouse divine mercy. Ulefizeh leka mishum achazariut, in which case it's not gratuitous cruelty. Okay, da'afilu im letzorach hanaat adam lo higia rachamei shmaim al ba'alei chayim makol shekain letzorach mitzvah. And the argument is this: if I can justify being cruel to animals for food by killing them, then I can certainly justify being cruel to birds to fulfill a spiritual need. It's like the arguments that you sometimes hear people say, why would God command us to kill animals for sacrifices? And it's gratuitous. No, it's not gratuitous. You know what may be more gratuitous than animal sacrifice? Killing animals for hamburgers. If we're able to justify being cruel to animals to eat their meat, then certainly we can justify being cruel to animals by killing them or sending away the mother bird in order to fulfill some kind of spiritual benefit that we can harness from that act. Okay? Okay, then the Chatam Sofer concludes, and he says, Ach shas dilan al korchach lo svira lehachi. But our Talmud, the Talmud Bavli, does not agree with the Zohar. And he brings various proofs to that fact. And therefore, in his concluding paragraph, he says, Al kol panim hayotze mizel nidon shelifanenu. And therefore, getting back to our original question, can you fulfill the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein on Shabbos or not? The answer is no. Either because there's no mitzvah when you don't want the birds and the mother and the or the chicks, you don't want the chicks or the eggs, or because because you're not obligated to fulfill this mitzvah. You're not obligated to try to fulfill this mitzvah when you don't want the eggs. And so therefore, the argument that he provides is we do not reckon with the Zohar because the Talmud Bavli does not agree with the Zohar. And whenever you find a conflict between Nigle and Nistar, whenever you find a disagreement between the Talmud and the Zohar, who do you paskin like? You go like the Talmud, the Nigle. And it's on that basis that the Chatam Sofer concludes that there is no obligation to fulfill this mitzvah, like Toby had surmised, and I hope now I've satisfied your
This year's chicks.
this year's chicks.
There
Yeah,
were 4 of them.
fantastic. So now that you've gone through the tshuva of the Chatam Sofer, at least in a cursory way, you now can your conscience can be assuaged, and you can reconcile your compassion with the halacha.
Hashem was always assuaged.
Yes,
by the
Rebecca.
mitzvah, And some others were between me and Hashem.
Yeah, okay. Between you and Hashem. Okay.
Okay, to do obedience. Like I've heard of people doing it, they find that. or
Okay,
getting-
so it's important to know, that there are people who do not agree with the Chatam Sofer. The Chatam Sofer was one of the most important poskim from the 19th century. He's heads and shoulders above all of the other poskim of the 19th century. With that said, there are authorities who say that no, we do go like the Zohar. And there are many instances where we go like the Zohar and not like the Nigla and not like the revealed Torah. A perfect example is that according to the revealed Talmudic law, a person is supposed to wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. It's only according to the Zohar that you don't put on tefillin on Chol HaMoed. And I would venture to say that the majority, perhaps even the vast majority of Jewry today follows Minhag Eretz Yisrael and does not put tefillin on Chol HaMoed. So this rule that the Chatam Sofer has given to us, that whenever there's a conflict between Nigla and Nistar, we always go according to the Nigla, is not so simple. So are there people who strive to do this mitzvah? Yes. I did this mitzvah when I was the yeshiva bacher. The yeshiva that I went to in Jerusalem was constructed like a big square letter O. So there was a big center in the middle, and birds would quite often nest there because it was like they were protected from the elements. And I asked my Rebbe if I could do the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein. And we discussed it, and he told me the parameters, and I went up on a step ladder, and I took a stick, and I just slightly touched the mother's tail, which was sitting there, wasn't moving. And I touched the mother's tail a couple of times, and it got up and it flew away. But it perched on the rooftop where it could still see what I was doing. And the halacha is you're not allowed to take the eggs until the mother is completely out of eyesight. It can no longer see what's going on. And so I had to wait another few minutes on that stepladder and wait for the mother to completely fly away. Then I picked up the nest. I said, this is my nest and the eggs in are mine. I put it back down, and then I got off the ladder and I went away. The next day, the mother came back, the birds hatched, and it was a happy ever after ending, at least for the mother bird and its eggs. So I fulfilled the mitzvah once in my life. I have not done the mitzvah since, except for maybe that one time where I facilitated someone else doing the mitzvah, because I subscribe to the Chatam Sofer. Perhaps it's because I'm more of a rationalist than a mystic, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that when you don't want the eggs, the Chatam Sofer is very sound. Now, with all of that said, what kind of message do I want to extract from this Devar Torah today? Let's take a look at Rav Sternbach from his Sefer Tam Vadas. And unfortunately, we won't have time to go through the entire thing because it's getting late. So I want just to get to the gist of it, which is that Rav Sternbach starts off by saying, he says, V'nira leva'er hadavar, I'd like to explain what's going on here. Uvegeder mitzvat shiluach hakein shechavtza Torah lahorot lanu. What is the Torah trying to teach us by giving us this mitzvah? Sheteva ha'adam umizgo im l'ravi im l'tov einam mushpa'im ela mimitzvot haTorah. That human behavior, or human character, I should say, is affected directly by the commandments of the Torah. When a Jew wishes to live his life according to the Torah, he is transformed in his nature, in his character, through the mitzvot that he does or does not do. Va'af she'inyan shiluach hakein hisir Torah mishum tsar ba'alei chayim, and even though the Torah tells us that you shall not take the birds with the mother present, and it's clearly because of not causing gratuitous pain to the mother, mikol makom yesh ba zeh tzad shenir'eh ka'achzari shehu notel ta'im me rivutz al baneha, or me ravotz al baneha. Even though there is a compassion involved, but there's also a discompassion involved. You know, when I sent away the mother bird and I saw it sitting there on the rooftop, just looking at me, like judging me, how you indecent human being. These are my children. How dare you take them? And you're going to destroy them? I spent so much, these little babies came out of my body and you're going to eat them? That's how I felt when I saw this mother looking at me. By the way, this took place 40 years ago. Like, I'm just telling you, I remember it as clear as day. This mother looking at me. There is an aspect of cruelty, even though it is given to us because of compassion. Because you're separating mother and children. V'nira sheba'asot adam davar zeh mashchito b'mitota v'nase tivo ra'u mitachzer b'shel kach omnam hefuch hadavar. He says, and even though it would seem that there is an aspect of cruelty and it's engendering a certain discompassion within a human being, but the opposite is true. Ki al yidei shemekayim bazeh mitzvot haTorah mosif ba'atzmo kedusha v'naseh libo er v'rachaman litzaran shel ba'alei chayim. And nonetheless, despite the fact that there is an aspect of cruelty, but there's also an aspect of compassion. In other words, I think if I can perhaps read between the lines, the Torah is not commanding the human being to be kulo rachamim, to be completely compassionate to every living thing. Because if you were going to live your life that way, you would have to think twice before walking down the sidewalk. Maybe I'll step on an ant. And how can I live with myself after having killed one of God's creatures? There is a certain degree of discompassion that is necessary for the human condition to thrive. And if we were going to be just completely rachamim, we couldn't survive. It would be impossible, right? But what the Torah is teaching is, in the course of living your life, even if your profession is as a shochet, you know, be nice to the little chicken before you shecht it. Don't kick it around. Don't drag it, by its wings to bring it to the shechita. Be gentle before you shecht the animal. Yes, it's true. You're causing that animal that slight amount of pain with the initial incision of the knife. But in the course of being discompassionate, be as compassionate as possible. And that's the message of the Torah over here. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I'm going to skip ahead to the second column. He says, V'yesh bazeh od sod nifla. There's something truly amazing that if we drill down a little deeper. Lahorot lanu darchei hashkachat haborei v'hanhagato im am segula. And I read these words with a certain amount of goosebumps in thinking about what we've encountered since October 7th. He says, this mitzvah also helps us better understand the way that God interacts with us in his providence. Ki be'emet nifleu derachav, because the truth is God's ways are mysterious. Shahaya HaKadosh Baruch Hu rovetz aleinu ke'im al baneha v'holech lifnehem yomam. Because initially, when God took us out of Egypt, he was like the mother bird resting on its chicks in the nest, constantly guiding us, never departing from us. God was with us during the first temple, completely protecting us. Histir HaKadosh Baruch Hu panav meitanu, v'nira ka'av she'ozevet panav le'anachot be'et zara. And it appears to us many times that God has forsaken us. God has completely left us, even when we're left with like children crying in our time of need, like those horrible scenes that we were exposed to from what happened on October 7th, that children were left just mercilessly crying before they were slaughtered by their oppressors. The ha'emet ki ein zeh, ela litzaref ula taheret libenu. But the fact is that God does not leave us. And the fact is that God presents us with certain experiences in life in order to purify us and to refine our hearts. V'hu min hatovot she'asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu imanu kedei letaher nishmatenu v'sheyihiyu mitanegot al ziv shchinato la'atid lavo. One of the things that God presents us with in this life is suffering and privation in order to allow us to be able to enjoy the ultimate benefits of the next world. And there's not much more that we can explain other than it's very mysterious. But the fact is that human beings suffer in this life as a way of refining us in some way and allowing us to be purified for the next world. Va'anu asher tachu einenu miraot. It's we who fail to see the divine plan involved in all of this suffering. Ulakotzer sichlenu ein anu yordim l'sof hanagat haboreim briotav. And we simply, we only see the very, very narrow view of the here and now, we fail to see the panoramic and wise view of the Ribbono Shel Olam and in the overall plan. Uche'ilu ba'im imo bitrunya. And therefore, it's almost like we challenge God and we say, God, why? Why are you doing all of this? And that's part of the reason that God tells us, send away the mother bird. Because even though it seems like to be an act of cruelty, adarabba, but just the opposite. Niftach sigur libenu lachush betzaron shel habriot. Through doing this thing which prima facie seems to be cruelty, it actually opens our hearts to compassion. Because what I'm doing is an act of kindness that is amidst the act of cruelty, or an act of cruelty amidst the act of kindness. Even though what I'm doing is cruel, but it is an act of compassion to remember that we are all God's creatures, even this little bird. And that's the lesson of sending away the mother bird. It's reminding us that just like my cruelty is really kindness, so too God's apparent cruelty with humankind, with the Jewish people in particular, is really an act of kindness. Okay? Darchei HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'rachamav einam kefi musagim shalanu klal u'chemevuar b'mitzvat shiluach hakein. An outsider who sees me sending away the mother bird says, what a cruel thing that you're doing. But he fails to see that I'm taking the baby chicks for myself. And I'm being as compassionate as I can be within the way of this world, which is that when you want to consume animals, do it in as compassionate a way as possible. Ume'ata yesh lanu lahavin divrei Zohar HaKadosh. And that's how we can understand the Zohar. Shebikiyum mitzvat shiluach hakein mekarvin et ha'geula. The Zohar seems to be telling us that by doing the mitzvah of shiluach hakein, getting back to Rebecca's question, why do some people still insist on doing this mitzvah, is because they subscribe to the Zohar's ideal, which is by doing this mitzvah, in some way, says the Zohar, you are causing the geula to come closer. Shemorim anu bazeh shemuvdalim anu min ha'amim v'shelo kehavanatam b'musagei rachamim v'achzariot beinatein. We have a different approach to what defines cruelty, okay? That this mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan reminds us that even within apparent acts of cruelty, there is compassion. And therefore, that's why we reject PETA and other movements like that, because we recognize that this world cannot operate completely on rachamim. That not
will end up being cruel. You can
those,
but not that God.
and it's like the saying is, those who are merciful on those who do not deserve to be, should not be the objects of mercy, will end up being cruel to those who do deserve to be the objects of mercy. Or I'm just paraphrasing the maxim. The idea is, you see the world today being compassionate upon the Hamasnikim and being discompassionate and cruel to the Jewish people. You see what's happening in the world today. Umekablim aleinu gezerato bi'ahava. This mitzvah engenders within us the ability to accept God's decrees with love, with an understanding that it's mysterious to me. just like it's mysterious to an onlooker who sees me sending away the mother bird, how this can be in any way be compassionate. Ma'orim anu bazeh lahachish ha'geula. And that's what triggers the redemption, is that sense of emuna that I have when I do this mitzvah. Va'af malachei marom tzoakim b'tichina lahachish ge'ulatenu. And even the angels in heaven, argues Rav Sternbuch, see this, reminds them of the human suffering of the Jewish people, and this hastens the redemption. V'hu segula nifla'a liyachid u'lerabim. And therefore it is a great, how would you translate segula? It's a great method for bringing redemption, both to the individual and to the community. So this is what I wanted to present to you today, just the idea that, yes, as a rationalist, I subscribe to the Chatam Sofer. As a mystic and as someone who tries to see the bigger picture whenever possible, I recognize that the Zohar's ideal of sending away the mother bird, even when you don't want the eggs or the chicks, there is something there that is going to trigger the redemption through an acknowledgement that even something that appears to be cruel is really Hashem being merciful and kind. And as difficult and as bitter of a pill as that is to swallow, especially in the times that we live in, that is the message of the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKein. Okay, questions, comments before we finish? Yes, Esther.
Obviously, that if you send away the mother, you will have a Rifas Yamim. But after all of this explanation, I'm wondering if it's the compassion that triggers a Rifas Yamim. Because that's really the purpose of sending the mother away.
Yeah.
It's to cause you to experience and to exhibit compassion. And it's in the laws around Tzar Ba'alei Chayim and don't eat Aver Minachai.
Well, this is the difference of opinion between, I guess, what you would say the Chatam Sofer school of the rational approach versus the supernatural approach. The Chatam Sofer's approach is that it has a transformational effect on me as a human being, and I thereby deserve to have Arichut Yamim because I've become a better person as a result. For the Zohar, at least the way Rosh Sternbuch explains it, there's a different transformational effect. Not that I'm refined in a sense in my character, but it's more that my emuna is further strengthened because this is a metaphor. Sending away the mother bird is a metaphor for what God is doing in the world today, specifically to the Jewish people. He is being sent away, and it appears to be cruel in the way that God is absent in our lives and allows things like October 7th to occur and the tremendous suffering that the Jewish people have been undergoing ever since. And yet at the same time, it's an act of compassion built in, and that strengthens my emunah. So instead of being transformational from an ethical standpoint, it's transformational from a emunah, a faith-building exercise. And that's perhaps where the Arichas Yamim comes from, or if not in this world, then in the next. Okay, what do we have on the screen? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're going to hold it here for today. Let me wish you all a wonderful week, and Bezrat Hashem we'll pick it up next Tuesday with a bigger crowd. Now that Tuesday.
Oh,
Today's Tuesday.
I know it's right up the long and don't just be Monday, no?
No, it's every
Oh.
Tuesday.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Rabbi.